Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. It was exactly 1 year ago tonight that Trump and Biden squared off in a debate that will live in infamy. The full extent of Biden's cognitive decline was on full display for the world to see.
It's Joe Biden.
For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. Billionaires in America. Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare, we're providing housing for Black Americans. Here's the deal: there's a lot of young women are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers and sisters. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
The idea that they're going to, I've been proposing that everybody, the millionaires pay 1%. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. He wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare for us to be able to negotiate drug prices with the big pharma companies.
Those are not deep fakes, folks. Now, 1 year later, Democrats are struggling with the fallout from their cover-up, and Republicans are demanding answers. House Oversight Chairman James Comer is pushing for more Biden aides to testify, calling on Karine Jean-Pierre, Ian Sams, Andrew Bates, and Jeff Zients, former chief of staff, to answer these questions. Chairman Comer also announced that the committee will issue a subpoena for top Jill Biden aide Anthony Bernal. Here now with reaction, Fox News contributor Miranda Devine and the morning meeting co-host Dan Tarantine. Wow. Miranda, they told us these were deep fakes, everything's fine, but I want people to understand why there are investigations right now. It's because Joe Biden left the Democratic nomination process, but he did not leave the presidency. He was president for 7 months after what you just saw with your own 2 eyes. What do you think is important for the House Oversight Committee to ask these folks? What would you ask them if you had them under oath?
Well, I mean, we want to know how this secret cabal, including the First Lady, Jill Biden, how they ran the presidency. It was a shadow presidency that they were running as Joe Biden's mind turned to mush. And we want to know exactly how unwell he was and whether or not he really authorised those signatures on a slew, especially in the final days, of executive actions and pardons. Because if other people did that and he was not fit to approve it, or he didn't even know about it, then that is fraud. And those people are in big trouble. I have a feeling, I mean, we had Neera Tanden the other day, who was a close secretary, who was in fact in charge of the auto pen for, I think, about 3 years of Joe Biden's presidency. She really just gave vague answers. I think it's not a perfect environment. If they're cooperative witnesses, I think you might get something. But these people are Biden loyalists. I think they're going to say as little as they can. There needs to be some kind of legal compulsion, I think.
Dan, are you in favor of these hearings? And if so, what do you think the upshot will be? Will it be that these folks will never work in the town again, or that the Democratic Party will continue to move on to folks like, well, Zohran Mamdani to carry their message?
Well, look, I think sunshine is always the best disinfectant. And I think even for our party to move past it on some level, there needs to be an airing of this. There needs to be some accountability for what happened, because I think there's no doubt that he was declining. You know, I've said before, he probably should have resigned early in 2024. But I think the real question is just, you know, when he was having bad days, how did they manage around this? And I think, you know, what we're going to get is what we saw in these books, which is he was increasingly not engaged. He was hidden even from his senior staff. And his condition was truly deteriorating. As you say, they weren't deep fakes. We all saw it with our own eyes. So, you know, hopefully at some point the public says, all right, we get it, he was bad, and they move on. But there's going to be some more bad days ahead for the Democratic Party.
Yes, and Miranda, when you recently interviewed President Trump, I think you touched a little bit about that. I mean, he made very clear the way he felt about the man standing next to him then. But as that campaign unfolded and they moved on to Kamala Harris, she had a different set of problems. And I think that plus the fact that people wanted Donald Trump in the big house and never again in the White House, they totally missed what was going on with we the people, what we want in our presidency. So how do you think that gets avoided in the future?
Well, I mean, I think that the Democratic Party still hasn't moved on. Their one note that they had during Kamala Harris's campaign was that Donald Trump is terrible. And they're still on it. I mean, they just oppose Donald Trump and everything he does. And unfortunately, as Trump fulfills his promises, as he stacks up win after win. I mean, I'm sure he'll have some tough times. It's not going to be smooth sailing. But as he increasingly sort of drags in former Democrat voters, I think the Democratic Party is finding itself out on a limb, and it will need to find a new way. I mean, maybe Zoran Mandami is what they've chosen, but I don't think that that's really palatable. I mean, he won 5% of the vote in New York City, so it's not a lot. And I think Dan's sort of the sensible, rational voice of the Democratic Party. They should listen to him if they don't want to just end up in the doldrums.
So, Dan, that's high praise coming from Miranda Devine. Let's all listen to you now. Don't name names. Give us the job description of a great Democratic candidate in 2028. So they're not talking about democracy, and they're vaccinated from Trump derangement syndrome, and they are not talking about abortion every which way and climate. Give us the job description of what you want to see from the standard bearer for your party in the future.
Yeah, I think it's two things. You got to be comfortable in your own skin. Don't try to be somebody you're not. I mean, I think Kamala Harris's biggest problem was she still doesn't know who she is. Is she progressive? Is she liberal? Is she outgoing? Is she, you know, this reserved person? And then lastly, focus on the real lives of real people, right? What they care about. It's Donald Trump's secret sauce since 2015.
Yeah, authenticity, nothing like it. I appreciate you both being here.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.